Pam, you're such an extraordinary resource, both to the academy and to the church, because you have deep grounding in youth ministry as a former youth minister. And you've been engaged in the most rigorous of academic psychological research protocols. So you have an ability to come at this question from both sides. So what I want to ask is, how has your academic psychological research informed your understanding of spiritual practices and the development of opening to the transcendent? And how has your spiritual life and your religious life and religious language informed your understanding of psychology and the biochemical workings of the mind?
Great question. Well, I'm laughing because so much of my life comes back to reciprocity. So my life really is, I have experiences personally, spiritually, and then I want to understand them empirically, which raises new questions. So I go back and forth between the psychology, theology experience. But taking a step back later, so much of my understanding of development is based on reciprocity. So in developmental psychology, we understand human development to occur as people interact with the systems around them. So there's this mutual reciprocity between a kid and the youth group. The kid impacts the youth group impacts the kid. But we look at this at all levels of the developmental system, we call it, just to be a little geeky there. But so God is part of that developmental system. And that's why I love this conceptualization of development, because I can say, okay, if we're looking at all of a kid's ecology, what about the divine ecology in their life? How does a child's or a youth's or an adult's interaction with God impact who they are? So a question that's come to mind is, what practices or what can people do to enable them to be more open or attuned to that divine ecology or to God's presence in their lives? And this is interesting because Christians have been practicing various spiritual disciplines. You mentioned Lectio Divina, obviously various forms of prayer, meditation, silence, fasting, service, worship, communal, individual, all these rich heritage of practices. And currently, we have a burgeoning field of what I would call contemplative neuropsychology that's looking at how contemplative practices actually change the human brain. One of the things of developmental psychology also is plasticity. Everything can change. And so one of my colleagues, Richie Davison at the University of Wisconsin, has actually looked at long-time practitioners of meditation, specifically Buddhist monks, and have demonstrated how their thousands and thousands of hours of meditation have actually really changed their brains. And what we're beginning to put together is these practices that Christians have been doing, not just the meditations you can get on Headspace, which I think are fantastic, but the practices that we are doing actually really transform us physiologically and can enable our brains, the circuitry, to be wired in such a way that we can be more attuned to God's movement, to the Holy Spirit, to the emotion of another. And that is really important. And I think in this day and age, just as people know they're supposed to go to the gym and work out, I think we'll get to the place where the general public actually understands they need to go to the mental gym and work out and calm their brains. And the good news is, as people of faith, we've been doing these practices for a long time, so we should have an edge up. But over time, I also think we've seen transitions in practices like worship. Worship is often extremely overstimulating these days. Video, music, there's less times for stillness and space. But I think as Christians, we would be wise, especially to help our youth create habits of quiet and stillness and meditation, whether it's corporate or individual, of Lectio Divina, of reading the scriptures, because that will enable them to actually regulate their emotions and be calm so that they can be aware of those things beyond the self.